Hello, this is chapter 9. Hang on, this got messed up here. This should not be in this, just a second. Okay, hello again. This is chapter 9. This is a short chapter. This talks about competition, and it talks about perfect competition, which is at one end of the spectrum, versus a monopoly, which is at the other end of the spectrum. So I talked about perfect competition a little bit in the last chapter because we were assuming perfect competition with the supply and the demand curves. So let's talk a little bit more detail about what happens with perfect competition. So with perfect competition, rivalry is really high, so there really are no cost advantages. Remember, I said that companies are price takers, not price makers. Also, the industry has no barriers to entry or exit. There's easy entry, easy exit into the industry. So a firm can earn positive or negative profit in the short run, but they can only earn an average rate of return in the long run. So if you come down here, when we talk about a monopoly and it says the profit is reduced to zero, and eventually, and also and they mentioned in the book that in perfect competition, profit is reduced to zero. That means excess profit. So you can earn this excess profit in the short run, but in the long run, you don't earn any excess profit. You just earn this normal rate of return. And so if you think about a monopoly, if you have a product that is profitable, where you're earning excess profits, you're one of the few in some kind of new industry, but it's very competitive, then the profit will attract new firms. So new firms will enter into the market. And then eventually what happens is your excess profit is reduced to zero and you just have this normal rate of return. So you have this constant entry and exit in a perfectly competitive market. Now, conversely, let's say that profits are negative. If profits are negative, firms will exit, and then you'll have this normal rate of return. So you have this constant state of flux in the short term. If profits are positive, meaning excess profits, firms will enter, and then that'll reduce excess profits down to zero. So you just have this normal rate of return. If there's losses, too many firms are in that industry and there's losses or negative profits, then firms will exit and it'll restore it back to a normal rate of return. All right, so that's basically what's happening in a competitive market. Now, with a monopoly, firms produce a product or service that has no close substitutes. So you can have these regulated monopolies, a government monopoly, which is like, for example, utilities, electricity. Governments grant these electric companies monopolies because it wouldn't make sense to have all these competing electric companies in our neighborhood running the different lines and so forth. But with these government monopolies, they do allow them to make a normal rate of return, a certain rate of return. Now, what I'm talking about here is, let's just take Apple, for example, because when you think about Apple, when they came out with the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad, they had such a unique, and they still do have a unique product, but they had such a unique product at that time that they were able to basically make monopoly profits off of that. So let's go back to the 90s when they invented the iPod. I just remember the iPod was selling for $99 in the 90s. You could buy an MP3 player for like $30. Nobody wanted the MP3 player. Everyone wanted the iPod. So if you have a product that is very unique, then you can charge these higher prices and have excess profits. All right, so let's look at this. With a monopoly, firms produce a product or service with no close substitutes. Rivalry is low or non-existent because no one else has come up with that product. There's no competitors. And barriers to entry are high, typically. So monopolies can charge higher prices due to lack of competition. So when you think about Apple, they do charge higher prices because their products are, a lot of people believe, are superior to other electronic products. So this is the case for a monopoly. However, in the long run, those monopoly profits are going to erode because in the long run, firms are going to develop eventually close substitutes and they'll enter the market eventually. So even with a monopoly, this excess profit is reduced to zero eventually, and you just have the normal rate of return. So basically, with perfect competition and with a monopoly, you have this same normal rate of return, but with a monopoly, it just takes a lot longer to get there, and firms can enjoy this excess profit for a longer period of time. All right, so that's what we're looking at in chapter 9. Two extremes, rivalry, or two extremes, perfect competition and monopoly. Now, in between there, I'm going to talk about this in later chapters, but I'm going to mention the other two types of competitive environments, because I want you to be thinking about that when you're working on your paper. So at one end, we have perfect competition. Okay. Then next, we have what's called monopolistic competition. So you have perfect competition, monopolistic competition, an oligopoly, and then a monopoly. Oligopoly, we talk about in chapter 15. Perfect competition, or excuse me, monopolistic competition, they don't really talk about that much in this textbook, so that's why I want to bring it up to you now. So think about the competitive nature of these different environments. We talked about perfect competition. Next is monopolistic competition. Now, what is monopolistic competition? That is where the products are very competitive, but you're differentiating your product in order to charge a higher price. So think about toothpaste. Toothpaste is toothpaste. At one point, 90 years ago, 80, 90 years ago, you'd buy tooth powder, you'd buy toothpaste, you go to the store, toothpaste was toothpaste. There was nothing differentiating it. Dish soap, nothing differentiating it. Laundry soap is laundry soap. Today, we have a whole aisle of toothpaste, all different kinds, all different types of, all different types of marketing for different types of toothpaste. Same with laundry soap. Same, you can mention, you can think of all kinds of consumer products where there's these slight differentiations. So basically, what these companies are doing is they're trying to differentiate their product through advertising mainly, and to tell us about the differentiation, but they're trying to differentiate their product so that they can charge a higher price and get a higher product. That's monopolistic competition. Next, we have oligopoly. One of your groups has been assigned Coca-Cola. That's like a perfect oligopoly if you think about Coca-Cola, because if you just look at the soft drink industry, you've got Coke and Pepsi. That's basically over 50% of the market. And so that's one example of an oligopoly. Oligopoly is when you just have a few firms in the industry. Another example of an oligopoly would be the airline industry. The generator industry. You have Generac and you have Honda, maybe another company, but the generator industry is an oligopoly. So when you just have a few companies who really dominate the industry, when the industry is just made up of a few companies, that's an oligopoly. So it's not quite a monopoly, of course, but it's a lot less competition than you would have with monopolistic competition or perfect competition, obviously. So with an oligopoly, these firms can charge higher prices, they earn higher profits. And the whole issue with an oligopoly is that since there's such a few firms, they can try to collude, which is illegal, but there's the threat of collusion to try to run the price up. And this whole issue with an oligopoly gets into something called game theory, which we'll talk about in chapter 15. But anyway, just start thinking about what is the what is the competitive environment for the company that you've been assigned to? What, and you can look at the Porter's 5 forces and do a SWOT analysis, but just think about what the competitive environment is. All right, so I just wanted to mention that in this chapter, so you would know the gamut: perfect competition, monopolistic competition, oligopoly, monopoly. All right, now let me go back. Let's go back to this last point here, the indifference principle. So the indifference principle basically means you're going to do a cost benefit analysis and you're going to be indifferent. Eventually, you're going to be indifferent between two choices. And so they're talking here about if an asset is mobile, that in the long run, the profit's going to be the same no matter where it goes. All right, and so they give this really interesting example regarding the labor market. And so they talk about San Diego versus Nashville. Nashville has, it's cheaper to live in Nashville. The quality of life, you would argue, is not as nice as living in San Diego because Nashville's hot and humid. And so all things being equal, people would rather live in San Diego. So people go to San Diego and they are, working in San Diego. But eventually what happens in San Diego, and this is actually happening because I'm from San Diego, and well, any of you who know about California, prices are outrageous for property. And the thing about San Diego is the pay is kind of low there because these employers know that people want to live in San Diego, but it's gotten to the point where it's not that much nicer to live in San Diego than, say, in the South. So let's take Nashville for an example. So eventually, the way the book explains it is people move to San Diego because the weather's so nice, blah, blah, blah. And it's just better. They think it's better quality of life. But then what happens? Well, price of housing goes up. There's more traffic. The pay is possibly a bit lower than Nashville because they know people like to live there. And so eventually, as more people move out there, it makes Nashville more attractive. And so eventually you're going to have this equalization where you're going to be indifferent between living in Nashville or living in San Diego. And you see that happening. I still have relatives in California, and I see that happening with Texas, really, between living in California versus living in Texas, because of course, anyone who lives in Southern California would say, well, why would I want to move to Texas? It's landlocked unless you're down on the Gulf. It's hot. It's not as nice as California. But here's the thing is it's gotten to be the quality of life is so bad in California. And for example, I have a cousin who's in her late 20s, early 30s. She just moved from San Diego to Texas. And my mother, who's from the Midwest, has lived in California for 60 years, just couldn't believe that she would move to Texas. And I said, well, why would why would somebody, it doesn't make sense for somebody in their 20s or 30s to stay in Southern California when they can't afford to buy a home even. You can't build equity, build wealth if you can't buy a house. It's hard to get a job. There's really not that many jobs available. You can go to Texas, you can afford to buy a house, you can build equity, you can get a decent job. And so again, we're seeing this equalization. Yeah, it's nicer to live in San Diego than somewhere in Texas, one could argue, but because of the indifference principle now, people have become indifferent between the two areas. So anyway, that's read that real quick on page 116, 117. That's the indifference principle. So that's it. The main points of this chapter is to understand, of course, understand the indifference principle, but also to understand the perfectly competitive market versus a monopoly. And the bottom line is both have a normal rate of return. It just takes a lot longer to get to that point with a monopoly. If you've got a product or service that is new, that is different than anyone else's, you can earn this monopoly profit for quite some time. Okay, that's it for chapter 9. Until next time, goodbye.